what is an endgame? This first sentence is sort of just the Wikipedia definition. It's the phase of chess after most pieces have been exchanged. A more technical definition is less than 7 major or minor pieces on the board. So that's all the pieces besides the pawns, right? So if you have a rook, bishop, and knight on one side, a rook, bishop, and knight on the other side, that's 6 pieces, 4 minor pieces each, the bishops and knights, and 1 major piece each, the rooks. That would total 6. Technically, you'd be in the endgame. Now, there is a little bit of a gray area. I've looked at a lot of positions that have 7 or 8 pieces on the board that I would maybe classify as an endgame if there aren't queens on the board. But in general, less than 7, consider that an endgame. All right, so why should we study endgames? Number one, endgames are often decisive. If you think of a middle game position, you make a mistake, you make a blunder, and you look at the Stockfish eval, and it'll say, okay, I lost 1 point in terms of eval. I lost 3 points in terms of eval. Sometimes those are decisive mistakes. Oh, I actually fell for a checkmate. But usually it just changes the probability of you winning or losing based on those moves. Oftentimes, though, endgames are so close to the exact finish of a game that the eval switches from this is a draw to this is a win. This is a draw, this is a loss. So it's very important to know your endgames well because endgames are decisive. Number 2, endgames inform you when to simplify or not. This is extremely important. If you're really strong at endgames, you can take your middle games and try to steer them into the endgame in a direction that favors you, right? So if your opponent is cruising towards a win, you know which endgames to avoid, and maybe you know which endgames could cause either problems for your opponent or could give you drawing chances. For example, like let's say your opponent has a bishop and a knight and 2 pawns and you're just stuck with a knight. Well, maybe you try to sacrifice your knight for the 2 pawns. Leave them with just a bishop and knight because you know it's a difficult endgame. Or maybe your opponent has a bishop and a rook pawn, but the rook pawn is going to queen on the wrong color of the bishop. If you know that endgame, you know that you can actually hold that draw. And we're not going to go into that specific one, but knowing endgames are very important. Number 3, endgames tend to occur without much time on the clock. This is important too. You want to save time for your endgames, especially if you're playing over-the-board classical chess. Keep time on the clock for the endgames because going back to number 1, they're often decisive. And if you don't have time on the clock, a blunder can just mean that you instantly lose the game. Number 4, I think endgames are a lost art in the online era of chess. So there's a lot of players now that are becoming super strong in the openings and the middle games. And that's because they're playing thousands of online games, a lot of blitz, a lot of rapid. But what you miss in the online era is playing endgames. You don't get true endgames with a lot of time on the clock. And that means that we start to lack endgame skills if we're not playing some of the slower time controls and studying some of these endgame positions. Number 5, I think you can really appreciate the beauty of the endgame. As you start to study them and really figure out some of the nuances, like there's a lot of just beautiful endgames. All right, so this is kind of talking about the tournament that got me into studying endgames again. I used to love endgames as a kid, and then I went through a phase as an adult where I really wanted to just like dominate people in the middle game and try to finish games cleanly or quickly. But now I'm starting to love endgames again, and this is why. Chicago Open 2023, earlier this year, I had a pre-event rating of 2219. I was playing 7 rounds in an under 2300 section. All of my opponents were USCF experts, so 2000 to 2199. I had 2 wins, 1 loss, and 4 draws, which lost me 15 rating points. And I've done reviews of these games on our YouTube channel, so you might have seen some of them. A lot of the games had high accuracy and equal endgames. And of those 4 draws, 3 of them were very kind of quickly agreed draws where we hadn't reached the endgame yet. And in doing post-game analysis with my opponents, most of them younger than myself, I realized that these players that I was playing were very sharp in the opening, solid in their middle games, but they were actually afraid of going into the end game. And once I realized that, I thought, okay, this has to be a main takeaway from this tournament. I need to win more end games. So that was kind of the start of what got me into focusing on end games. And the next set of games, I'm going to show you a bunch of them. These are positions where I played players usually over 2,000 and tried to take them down in the end game in classical over the board chess. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through some of those games. There's going to be a lot of back and forth with questions and answers. Okay, so before we go into this very first game, are there any questions about what we've looked at so far? Type it in the chat if you have any questions. Hype is saying there's nothing like classical chess. Yeah, that's true. Resta J is saying, when my king is finally allowed to stop being a coward and go out to lead the attack himself. That's his endgame definition. I like it. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat so far, so let's jump into this first position. Let's set the stage. So I'm playing the white pieces, and you guys as viewers, I want you to be putting yourself in the shoes of the side that's on the bottom, right? So you're playing white here. Black just played rook to f5. His rating is 2064, and your rating is 2219. So you're a little bit higher rated than black here. Both sides have 11 minutes on the clock with a 30-second increment. Technically, this is still the middle game, but I want to know, so put your answer in the chat. What move do you play here? There's one move that stands out, is much stronger than the other moves. Ruck, you can do that. You can claim an endgame when you blunder your queen. I approve. Especially if it's under 7 pieces. Okay, Village Buster is saying pawn to f4. Barrett is saying pawn to f4. So the idea is black is attacking this bishop. So that's why we're seeing this f4 suggestion. What else do you guys think? Any other moves? I'll give you guys a hint. The top move is a sacrifice. Okay, I see a bishop to b2. I see a rook takes d3, rook takes d3, rook takes d3. Rook takes d3 is correct. Let's look at f4 briefly because 2 people mentioned it. If pawn to f4, rook to f7, the computer is saying this is about equal. So we're equal on material. It's hard to prove any advantage for white. Let's look at rook takes d3. Rook takes d3 got a brilliant move from chess.com. And here's the idea. Our queen is already attacking the rook on c8. A rook on c1 is x-raying this bishop to attack the rook on c8. It's only defended once, right? So there's no bishop takes d3 because of rook takes c8. We're also on the queen, and the queen is trying to guard the rook. So the pieces are a little bit overloaded here for black. That queen is trying to recapture on d3 and guard the rook on c8. The best move is queen takes d3. That's what black played. And now queen takes c8 and queen to d2, forking the rook and the pawn. Now at this point, there's one move that's easily winning, and the next best move is around a +2 eval. So what move should white play here? Put your answer in the chat. There's a lot of threats. Queen takes rook, queen takes f2, and this bishop is being attacked. This knight is hanging. This bishop is hanging. Position's looking pretty crazy with 8 pieces on the board. Okay, I'm seeing a bishop to c6. Queen takes e8 from Dennis. Hype is saying rook to f1. Rook to f1 is attacked by the bishop. Hype might have calculated this. A couple more queen takes e8s. Oh, hey, Mitch, welcome. Good to see you. Mitch is saying bishop to f4. attacking the queen. We're seeing queen takes c4. Hey, Smithy Q is here. Welcome, Smithy Q. Smithy Q says rook takes c4. Hype has taken back his rook to f1 suggestion. Okay, Hype, you're going to be happy to hear this. Rook to f1 is the correct move. Rook to f1 is the only move with that large of an eval. So let's look at this. Rook to f1. What happens if bishop takes f1? Well, now we insert the queen check, and we can take this pawn with check. And in the end position, you still have to be careful with queen takes f2. So there's only one winning move here. And now it's Mitch's idea from move 1, bishop to f4, hitting the queen. And no matter where the queen moves, we scoop up the bishop next. So let's just say queen back. Now this position is easily winning because we have 2 bishops and 2 pawns for the rook. And our king is very safe on g1. So rook to f1, super strong move. Oh yeah, Memphis in the background. There was some noise outside. Memphis saw rook f1 ages ago. So I missed this move, rook to f1. The move I played in the game was queen takes e8. And that's about equal. It's the third best move. If you mentioned queen takes c4, this was second best, and this is around a +2 eval. After takes, the king moves, rook takes e5, rook f1. It's equal material, but it's a little bit better for white still. Okay, so going back to the game. Queen takes e8 check, blunder. My opponent blocks with rook to f8. And now there's only one good move for white. Queen takes f8. So it's getting a brilliant mark because it's a sacrifice, I think, and it's the best move. But the idea is we're going into an endgame where it's going to be rook and bishop against queen. So another question for you guys. What's the best way to play for a win here? And not just one move, but just tell me like in a sentence, what's the plan here to play for a win as white? It's an equal position, but we do have some winning chances. So let me know in the chat, how do you play for a win here? Dennis says FedEx drove by. Yeah, Smithy Q, that's exactly what I was thinking. Have all of your pieces protected and use the passed A pawn. Ruck is saying the same thing. Dennis is saying the same thing. Presta J, yeah, don't get forked by the queen. Right, try to win the B6 pawn maybe. That's a good suggestion. Okay, you guys are all on the right track. And we're going to talk about passed pawns a lot today. This A pawn is going to be the key to getting a victory. We want to create problems with the A pawn. So what I did here is I played rook takes c4, and my opponent checks me, which forks the king and bishop. I block, they take the bishop. And now I want to utilize that strategy that you guys found in the chat. I want to figure out how can I create a passed A pawn and use that pawn to win the game. So this is still a dead equal position according to Stockfish. This is another good thing to appreciate. Don't always trust Stockfish. Sometimes you have to think in terms of practical chances. And I look at this position and I see the plan for white. Try to win this pawn, try to promote the A pawn. This king on g1 is pretty safe, right? 3 pawns and the bishop. It's really difficult for the black queen to attack. What's the plan for black? It's not very obvious, but the best plan for black is actually to push the kingside pawns. Black needs to try to break this structure up by pushing the h and g pawns up the board. So let's see what happens. First I play rook c6, attacking the pawn. Black pushes, and now rook to a6. And my idea with rook to a6 is I want to defend the pawn on a3 with the rook, and I'm planning rook to a5, keeping this pawn defended, and then take the b pawn with either rook or bishop. And during the game, I felt that I was winning here already. even though the eval is equal. So with best play, black can hold this. But this plan looks pretty straightforward. Black plays king e7, rook a5, creating the double attack. Queen to b2, attacking a3, eyeing f2, but we're still able to play bishop takes b5. Hype rook to c5 was also a good move. Yep, that would be fine. I was trying to be a little bit sneaky and defend the a pawn at the same time. Now black plays h5, strongest move. I play h4, trying to slow down the counterplay. And black plays pawn to e5, bishop to f1. So the idea with bishop to f1 is I'm trying to keep this secure king position. There's no way for the black queen to check currently. And now I want to get the b pawn or the a pawn running up the board. The eval here is actually 0.00 still. This is still a draw with best play. Even though I'm up 1 point in material, I have 2 passed pawns, and it looks like they're just going to cruise to victory. So now we're going to look at this from the other side. Let me know in the chat, what's black's best plan to hold this endgame? And I already sort of talked about this earlier, but how do you hold the endgame as black? Put your answers in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Smithy Q. I did like that rook a5 idea a lot. I felt like it was sort of a tricky move for my opponent. And sometimes the psychology in the endgames can factor in too. If your opponent's like, oh, I didn't see that, and it feels like a really strong move, it might throw them off. Yeah, Smithy Q saying we should try to push this pawn up to e3. Rook is saying bring the king over to the king side and play g5. Barrett's saying queen to d4, a well-timed g5. Yeah, you guys are on the right track. And pawn to e4 is a good move here. Queen to d4 is a good move here. I really like just playing g5 right away because it shows the idea. After h takes g5, you can now play e4 or h4. And I think h4 really just highlights what's going on here. Black can sacrifice both kingside pawns, but what it does is it opens up this area around the white king. And now after queen to d4, this is going to be captured, and there's going to be a chance to play queen g4, queen d1, and just start checking back and forth. This is actually a draw with best play. Black can pretty much sacrifice all the pawns except the e pawn and hold the draw. But that's really hard to figure out during the game. The clocks were getting low, around 5 minutes each, and my opponent played king to d6. Now again in the chat, tell me the move for white. There's one very strong move here. It's, I would say, already winning at a human versus human level. Stockfish is saying 1.6. And I don't know if that 1.6 would peter out to 0.0 or if it would go to a win at super high depth, but it's showing that there is chances for white. So what's the best move? 30-second increment hype. What's the best move for white? Hype is saying pawn to b5. Barrett says b5. Rook is saying impulse says b5. Can't justify it beyond one move. Yeah, it's also good to look at what are you going to do next? b5 and then what? e5 feels too simple. There are some nice tactics involved with b5. So b5 is the answer. This is the best move. Now black played pawn to e4. And this is a bit of a mistake. The best move is actually king to e7, but he just brought the king out to d6. So I don't really think he's going to play that. Now, there's only one winning move. Rook to a6 check is second best move, and it's a 0.6 eval. So it's a complicated endgame, but there's one winning move here. Yep, that's right. Pawn to b6. That's the move. And the idea is if queen takes b6, rook to a6, black loses the queen and the game. So black plays king to c6. Yeah, it's just nasty. And now rook to b5. And black resigns. Because if black takes the rook and the bishop takes back, king takes, this pawn queens. If black takes the rook, bishop takes, king takes pawn, this is going to be an easy win. The bishop just goes away. These pawns on light are going to fall. There's another passer over here. And with the rook behind the pawn, this pawn's just going to go right up the board and queen. So that ended the game. And I think the takeaways here are to try to create a position that's difficult for your opponent to solve, right? This was a stockfish equal position. Going back to when the dust first settled here, right here. This is a stockfish equal position. And it stayed equal for about 5 moves, but it was much more difficult, in my opinion, for black to play than white. And you guys did a great job. You pretty much answered all the questions correctly. All right, so now let's go to game number 2. In this game, we are playing the black pieces. We're going to jump into move 32. Technically not an endgame yet. We have 8 pieces, but it feels close enough. This came out of a Caro-Kann. White's position is much better here. Eval is like +3, and his rating is 2174. So he's only a little bit lower rated than us. Essentially, we're the same rating. 30-second increment. But white only has 3 minutes, and you have 17 minutes. Okay, so you're way up on the clock in a losing position. What would you say is the best plan for black to fight for a win here? Put your answer in the chat. It can either be moves or just high level. What's the plan? Maybe I think I said fight for a win. Fight for a win or draw. You know, what's the best plan for black not to lose this position? There's one passed pawn sitting here on d4. White definitely has the pawn majority on the king side, 4 versus 1. And white has an extra rook in exchange for a knight. Jaga is saying pawn to b5. Ufets is saying without calculating knight to e3. Oh, interesting. Pawn takes e3 has to be calculated. Rook is saying central passed pawn is the plan. Maximize it. Trade off pieces. So I agree. I think rook, this is plan number 1. Let's try to win with this passed pawn. But it's going to be difficult because these light squares are going to be controlled by white. And we'll see in a couple of moves, he ends up playing rook to d3 and rook to d1, trying to blockade this pawn. Barrett's saying rook to e8. Andy's saying focus on protecting the d pawn. Okay, chess simple. You have the correct answer as well. So I see Jagajit also said it. It's pawn to b5. We want to push this queenside majority. We have 2 versus 1 on the queen side. We already have this passed pawn. Let's create another passed pawn. Passed pawns cause problems. I want you guys to remember that sentence. If you only remember one thing from this lesson, that's a good one. Passed pawns cause problems. Pawn to b5. We're trying to create a passed pawn over here. Our opponent plays knight to f3. So he's triple attacking this pawn. It's defended 3 times. So for now, we're fine. But his plan is going to be double the rooks. So a 4th attacker is coming soon. And we want to get this b pawn rolling. So I start with rook to d8. This could threaten pawn to d3. So white sticks his rook there. Now, knight to e7. The idea here is this knight on f5 was only supporting the pawn. We want this knight to come over to c6, not only support the pawn, but support the b4 pawn push as well. Rook f to d1, white's playing very solid. His plan is just let's blockade the passed pawn and let's use the 4 versus 1 on the king side, right? He's just going to start pushing these pawns up the board, bring the king up, blockade my only passed pawn, and he's going to play for the win this way. But we need to look to play actively, right? Now we can play knight to c6. So this pawn is attacked 4 times and defended 4 times. It's kind of interesting. Every piece on the board is focused on this one pawn. But now that every piece is focused on this one pawn, we're going to create another pawn to think about. It's going to be either the b pawn or the a pawn. So here, white made an inaccuracy, and he was low on time. The best move for white is e6 and playing actively. He played pawn to g3. And this kind of goes back to the last game. It doesn't appear that anything's wrong with g3. g3 looks pretty easy, or pretty intuitive, but g3 is an inaccuracy because now we play pawn to b4 and we start smashing through on the queen side. So the threat is b takes a3, winning that pawn, so white takes. We play knight takes b4, hitting the rook, and all of a sudden, white starts getting nervous. This rook has nowhere to go. He doesn't have much time on the clock. There's only one winning move for white. Let's flip the board temporarily. What is the winning move for white? Put your answer in the chat, because I think this is going to show how it's so difficult to play this position from the white side to play for a win. One winning move for white. What do you guys think? Yeah, SmintheQ was right. Pawn to g4 could have also chased the knight on f5. So when the knight was here, pawn to g4 would be an idea. Rook takes b3. This is what Hype is saying. This is the move that was played in the game. Rook takes b3, rook takes b3. That's the second best move. And it is about half a pawn better for white. Knight takes d4 is not the answer. It's not knight g5. It's not e6. No one has said it yet. It's a crazy looking move. This was not on my radar at all during the game. But it came up a couple times actually as a potential move. Isaac is close. Rook to e3 because of the pin. Very close. Bishop a3, no. Rook e8, rook a1, bishop a3. There it is. Jagajit, rook to c3. That was the only winning move for white. And it's very complicated. The idea is you're going to sack the rook for the bishop. So you're still doing the exchange sack, but you're choosing to take the bishop instead. And then it makes it harder for black to push those pawns. All right, let's flip the board again. So rook to c3. That was not played in the game. Rook takes b3 was played. A takes b. And now bishop to a3. Attacking the knight with the bishop behind it. White is still up a pawn. So white's probably trying to win as long as he can eliminate the pass pawns. And now an idea for white is also rook to b1 and snatch that b pawn. The b pawn is hard to defend for us. Now we go rook a8, hitting the bishop. Bishop takes b4. And here we have a cool move, pawn to b2. And the idea is our rook is coming to a1, supported by the pawn. We're sacking the bishop. If bishop takes c5, this is going to be a crazy line. We have rook a1, and there's no way that white can stop us from queening. So they go rook f1. We take, they take, b1 queen. The crazy thing with this position, you run the engine on this, it'll say it's like -1 to -2 for black. I played this out though. There's no way for black to win. White can actually create a fortress. White can just hide the king on g2, put the bishop on e3, and there's no way for black to crack it. And I tried like running the black king all the way up the board. I tried dancing around with the queen, trying to attack the knight. There was no way for black to win this. So good winning chance by playing pawn to b2, but there is this fortress if white finds it. So I did not play pawn to b2 in the game. That was probably the best chance to win. I played bishop takes b4. White goes rook to b1. And now pawn to d3. And white's trying to stop both of these passed pawns. This is a draw with best play. Rook takes b3. Rook a1 check. King goes up. And now pawn to d2. It's about to queen. And white sacrifices the knight for the pawn. So now we get this dynamic. A bishop against 3 pawns. Rook to b2. Bishop c3. Rook e2. And I was low on time as well. So we're both low on time. We'll go forward a couple moves. Here I decided white just keeps making progress. And with just my rook and bishop, I'm having trouble slowing white down. I don't want these white pawns to keep pushing up the board. And eventually I just get crushed. So I play rook to e1, offering the rook trade. And white immediately snaps it off. We take back. Now, at this point, with the rooks off the board, with best play, what is the result? Put your answer in the chat. Is this a win for white, win for black, or a draw? Hype says it's probably losing for black. It's definitely scary seeing this chain of 4 pawns and we only have 1. Dennis is saying draw with best play. Just Simple says draw. It's 3 minutes for white, 8 minutes for us on the clock. Draw. Draw. Okay, you guys are good. Yep, this is a draw with best play, but it's a bit scary. So king to e4 played, pawn to g6, getting ready to trade a pawn on f5. White goes for this push, take, king e7. And now white's trying to figure out, can he maneuver the king around and create a chance to make me sack my bishop at the wrong moment and win the pawn endgame? So I'm waiting for white. As soon as this pawn pushes, I'm going to sack, take, knowing that this pawn alone cannot win. So it'll be a draw if it's just that pawn against our king. So white's trying to bring the king around. And now f6 check is played. King g6. So if this pawn pushes, we take here. King f4. Now tell me the best move for black. Type your answer in the chat. There's actually only one move that draws this position. Every other move loses. So that's how close this is to a loss. Only one move draws this position. Mitch. Mitch is saying king takes f6, explaining the pinned pawn. I like it. King f7. Okay, a couple king f7s. Couple bishop to d8s. A bishop to b8. What else do we think? It's a tricky position. So the answer is bishop to d8. If king f7 is played, white can play king f5 and e6 check, and it'll be a win. If we wait with bishop to b8, this is a win for white if they play pawn to h4. Because this king is eventually going to have to move, and then their king gets to that critical square f5. So the only move is bishop to d8. And here a draw was agreed because bishop takes f6 is coming no matter what. Pawn takes, king takes, and we reach that drawn position. So I think the key takeaways from this endgame: play actively, save time for your endgames, and keep in mind, endgames have tactics too, right? So not only do you need to calculate deep in endgames, but you also need to calculate basic tactics as well. So save time for your endgames and play actively. Going back to that "past pawns cause problems" quote, you want to play actively in all of your endgames. It's very important to play active. Okay, this is going to be a fun one. We're on move 31. Technically still a middle game, but it's close. Opponent is rated 2068. He has 14 minutes. We have 24 minutes with a 30-second increment. This position is dead equal, and it's been equal all games. So kind of like those Chicago Open games. We're playing someone in the 2000s, and this has just been a very high accuracy game. So how do we press for the win here? All moves are showing 0.00. The move I played in the game is not any better than, there's like 10 other moves that are all equal. But I want to show you guys how I play for the win. Pawn to h5. The threat is pawn to h6 check. And this is sort of an alpha 0 idea. If you reach the pawn to h6 and force that king back, that pawn can cause tactical problems for black. So black takes. Now I played knight to f6, sacrificing another pawn if black takes. And if black doesn't take, knight takes h5. So he takes, I take, king takes. So according to Stockfish here, the evaluation is still equal, but we're down 2 pawns. And here black had actually burned some of his valuable time. So instead of 14 minutes for black, he's down to 9 minutes, and we have 18 minutes. So in this position, type your move in the chat. How do we press for a win? What move would you play here? Keep in mind, play active. Keep playing active. Create threats. Rook to h1. That's a strong move, rook h1. It's one of the top moves. Rook to e5. That looks pretty good as well. Going after this h-pawn. A couple rook to e5s. Krishna, welcome. Knight to e5. Rook h4 and double. Oh yeah, okay, so that would be this rook h4, this rook over. So I played Krishna's move. You guys had some good suggestions. Rook h1 is the top Stockfish move, but it's close. I played knight to e5, threatening knight to d7, forking the rook and the king. Knights are very tricky in endgames, and when the clock gets low, knights can cause a lot of problems as well. Black plays rook to b2. He's trying to play active himself. That's good. Here I grab the c pawn, so now black's only up 1 pawn. And he goes knight to f5. So this knight was being attacked. He retreats. If black had one free move here, it would be winning for black after rook takes a3. But here I played rook to c7. So this knight is defended by our rook, and it attacks f7. So the threat now is rook takes f7. And we don't really care if black takes this pawn on a3, because we're going for the counterplay on the king side. So black plays knight to d6, trying to hold his material advantage, and now rook to f4 check. This is a crazy position. We are technically in the endgame, 6 pieces. What happens here if black plays king takes knight? Let's see who gets it first. What's the move for white? King takes knight. And I think the psychology of seeing this move rook to f4 check really threw our opponent off in the game. And I'm saying we and are trying to put you guys in the shoes of playing white here. Yes, rook to c5. If king takes knight, rook to c5 is a checkmate. With the king sitting in the middle of the board, it's only 2 rooks to checkmate it. So he goes king g7. And now knight takes f7. So we're back to equal material. And black finds the best move. Rook to b7. Yeah, Jagajit, you got it first. Good job. Rook to b7 was the best move. Rook takes, knight to g5. So there's no rook takes a3 yet, because we have rook to f7, forking the king and knight. Knight goes back to d8 to defend, right? There's no knight takes e6. There's no rook f7. Everything's defended. Rook to d4. Still no rook takes a3. So notice the trend here. We want to keep the pressure on black, and we want to make sure that black cannot win the a-pawn. And we're trying to use the a-pawn to cause problems for black. We're trying to use the a-pawn to win this game. We know it's probably a draw with best play, but we want to win this with the a-pawn. Smithy Q, you're going to love endgames in the next few minutes. King g6, going after our knight. So we retreat. Knight f7, pawn to a4. Pawn is safe, and the eval is 0.4 now, so we're making a little progress. Rook a5. Here I didn't have a great plan. The best move would have been knight to d2, followed by knight b3, bring the rook over, and kind of use the rook and knight to get this pawn to a5. Let me show that position. If the knight's on b3 and the pawn's on a5, that frees up our rook to more easily move around to the king side. So now this black king needs to kind of babysit the h-pawns, and then we can start to bring our king into the game. Walk our king over to the queen side. So that's the most straightforward plan. I played king f1, knight e5, and I don't want the trade. I'm still playing for the win. f4. And here I'm just trying to play solid and then eventually bring my king over. And now black plays rook to c2. And we should be happy to see this move, because after rook to c2, we block with rook to d2. Black does not want this trade because it's going to be too hard to stop this pawn. And after the rook moves, we get the rook behind the pawn. Now just focus on the a-file. This is a big advantage for white. This is a big advantage for us, because when this rook moves for black, anywhere on the a-file, we push our pawn up. Right, so black doesn't really have any free moves with this rook. We have free moves with our rook. We can go anywhere behind our pawn on the a-file. We can go up, down, up, down. The black rook can't move without us making progress. So even though Stockfish is still saying 0.00, you have to think human versus human, practical chances. This is a huge improvement, getting our rook behind the pawn. Okay, so now make a couple more moves. Not a lot's happening yet. Black plays knight to b6. Double attack on the pawn. I could play knight to c3 to defend. It's a bit passive though. So instead, play the active move. Rook to b3. Sacrificing the pawn on a4. But look at the black king. It's currently being controlled by the knight and blocked by the pawn. This is another good endgame takeaway. If you can get the king in a mating net, like we saw earlier, the two rooks threatening mate, or if you can get the opponent's king on the 8th rank, those are both big advantages in the endgame. So here black does not take the pawn. He did not want to see the quick rook to b7 check going to the 8th rank. He retreats the knight, thinking, okay, maybe grab the pawn next. So, should we play rook to b4? No, too passive. Rook to b7, and the eval here is 0.2, so it's still a draw with best play. Rook to b7, we pin the knight to the king, and the king still cannot step up because our knight guards d6. King e8 played. Now knight to d6 check, and remember the clocks are low too. Black plays king to e7. You see the double question marks next to the king. White to play. Put it in the chat. What do you play here? Black finally cracked in this position. And now we're winning. And it was playing actively that got us this win. Smithy Q says tactics. Jagajit, first correct answer again. Knight to c4. That's the only winning move. And that's the answer. Hype has it as well. Hey Insidia, welcome to the chat. Insidia was saying rook takes d7 check. You have to play knight to c4. This is a deep move, but the idea is this rook is being attacked. And when the rook moves, we go knight to e5, double attacking this knight, and there's forks in the air. So my opponent played rook to c5. Now we go knight to e5, creating the double attack. The rook moved away here. So the idea is if, let's say, rook here, you can simply take, and this is a winning endgame. The pawn runs. So my opponent goes check. I moved the king, checks a few times. He took the knight, and I went on to win this game. There was a bunch of checks, but eventually the a pawn comes up the board and ended in a checkmate. So another example of an endgame that's dead equal, but playing active can create problems for the opponent. And you also want to save a lot of time for your endgames, right? Because we know endgames are very difficult. Yeah, thanks, Ruck. I like that. Me too. We know endgames are difficult, so you want to save time on the clock. All right, let's go to the next one. This was a tough position. Our opponent is rated in the 1700s. We're rated 2200. So 500-point rating difference. He's played an outstanding game so far, and we were worse most of the game. Both sides have 12 minutes. There's a 30-second delay. We are up the exchange for a pawn. So we have this rook for knight and pawn. But our rook is a pretty bad piece sitting over here on h4. So we got to figure out what's the best way to play for a win. Let's start with d takes c. And the idea here is maybe we win with this passed pawn or create problems with the passed pawn, right? Passed pawns cause problems. In the game here, I played pawn to b5. The strongest move, though, is rook takes e4. And that kind of goes back to the activity principle, right? Rook takes, knight takes, queen takes. All of a sudden, instead of our king being almost checkmated, we're about to win this f-pawn and our king is safe. And then maybe we can attack the black king, right? So we're trying to shift who has the initiative, who has more threats, which side is more difficult to play, right? We want all those things in our favor. Instead, I played pawn to b5. Inaccuracy. C takes b. There is a very strong move for black here. Queen to a7 is tough to deal with. It threatens mate on f2. But our opponent plays c takes b. C takes b. Now he plays queen to d5. And here I started to get really nervous because this king is almost checkmated and there's not a lot of time on the clock. So what I decided to do is, can I convert this in a queenless endgame? Right? I know that black's main play is coming from checkmating the white king. Passed pawns provoke problems. Yeah, more alliteration. I like it. Black's main idea is to create checkmate threats, and it's a really strong idea. If I can get the queens off the board, though, I think it's easier to play for white. The rook could become active. If this rook gets off the h4 square, let's say gets somewhere on the 7th rank, it's more difficult for black. Pose problems, I like that too. Okay, I should have worked on my alliteration. So here, we can sacrifice the b pawn to get the queen trade. Knight to e3. Hitting the queen, the only good move is to grab the pawn, and now queen to c4 check. Queen takes, d5, knight e3. Now, this is a poll question for you guys. Which side would you rather play in this position? Type it in the chat. Would you rather play white or would you rather play black? And then I'll let you know what I was thinking during the game. Which side would you rather play, white or black? Everybody's saying black. Okay. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's like 8-1 for black so far. 9-1 for black. Ethan saying white. Jagajit saying white. Okay, this is interesting. During the game, I felt that it was easier to play for white. Jan is saying white, and I'll explain why. Our king is in pretty good position to slow down these black pawns. We also have the pawn on f2 that guards the e3 square. Black has to deal with this pawn immediately, and we're about to attack it a second time. So if it pushes forward, we can move our knight to either f5 or c2, attacking this square. That means this knight has to move. When this knight moves, that frees up the f4 square. Then we play rook f4, cutting off the black king. Our rook will also pressure this pawn, which is going to be undefended by a pawn, right? It's only guarded by the knight. So all of a sudden, we start to get freedom with the rook, some weak pawns for black, and I think it's a little easier to play for white. So it's very interesting to see that you guys prefer black, because we did talk about the passed pawns posing problems. And yeah, Rook is saying that's right. That's how to get the rook active. So if you know the rook's getting active, then maybe you start to lean towards, well, maybe it's easier for white. Okay, knight b4 played, defending the pawn. Rook f4, cutting off the king. g6. And now, playing actively, we go rook to f6. Our rook is attacking the g pawn, and the h pawn is behind it. Pawn to d4 played. Blunder by white. So this is partially due to clock starting to get low. It was about 6 minutes to 2 minutes here. Black plays pawn to d4 with the blunder in a difficult position, I think, to play for black. You know, in this position when he played g6, the best move is knight to h7. So it's kind of difficult to figure out what to do here for black. He was trying to play actively himself by pushing pawns, but this is a critical pawn move. Should be decisive with best play. So rook takes g6, we got it right. King f7. And now what do you play as white? Put your answer in the chat. There are 2 winning moves. Only 2 that are winning with best play. And I did not play one of them in the game. Jagajit is saying knight to f5. Jagajit, what is your rating? I'm very curious. I feel like you get all of the answers correct. Jan is saying knight to g4. Thomas, knight f5. Dennis, knight f5. Hype, knight d1. Knight f5 and get that mating net built up, baby. I like it. FIDE 1338. You're doing a good job on the questions. So the 2 winning moves are knight to g4 and knight to f5. In the game, I played knight to c4. And there's a crazy move here for black. There's one move for black that holds this. Neither of us spotted it during the game. It's knight to c2. And if, let's say, rook takes h6 is played, you can go pawn to e3 as black. And after check, take, this is actually a draw. So kind of a crazy line, but it's a way for black to push these pawns through and hold. Instead, our opponent plays knight to d3 in the game, which is a mistake. Rook takes h6, king f8, rook f6 check. And now there are no good options for black because moving the king this way allows rook to g6 and push the h-pawn. And our opponent played king g7 during the game, which allowed rook to g6, winning the knight. So another dead equal stockfish endgame. Smithy Q is starting to fall in love with endgames now, but we can show how looking at imbalances in this game, right? Looking at the queen trade opportunity, comparing king safety, plus, so from this position, before playing knight to e3, if you have time on the clock, you can calculate out to the point of this rook getting free, right? So that line we looked at, you can go this deep because these moves are almost all forced. Knight e3, this is the only good move. We force the queen trade, and now black has to defend the pawn, right? Either the knight retreats, freeing our rook, or the pawn pushes, we attack it again. Has to be defended and the rook is free, right? You can figure that all out from the point you sack the b pawn and play knight e3 here. So look at the imbalances. In this case, it was king safety, active rook in a rook and pawn, or rook and knight and pawn endgame, right? When we have the rook and black doesn't, the knights can be a little bit clumsy, right? Rooks are super strong trying to pick off pawns. So you can use those imbalances to convert for trying to figure out how to get the win. All right. Next game. So we're about an hour in. We'll probably do one more game. And in this game, we're playing the black pieces. Our opponent's rated a little over 2,000. We have the advantage here. Hey, Thomas, thanks. And okay, I should also mention, if you signed up with the Google form, you'll get a link right after this class to just come watch it again. But you can also go on the YouTube channel, watch it on there. And in a couple days, what I'll do is I'll download this lesson and I'll strip out the beginning and the end and I'll repost it. So this will be on our YouTube channel. Our opponent's rated over 2,000 and he performed at the master level in his last event. He has 26 minutes and we have 9 minutes. I think I already said the eval, but what color here would you prefer? Would you rather be white or black? So black has the bishop. Black does have doubled F pawns. White's got the extra queenside pawn and a knight. But in terms of king safety, this king is probably a little bit safer than the king on G2. So put in the chat, would you rather be white or black here? Peter is saying he'd rather play black. Yeah, Chess Simple makes a really good point going back to that last game. He said, I've heard that the side with the extra pieces needs a heavy piece as the play coordinating piece. That seemed to be the case with the queen trade being so effective. Okay, Rook is saying he'd rather play white marginally. Potential pass pawn, tricky knight. Most people are saying black with the activity. And I did spoil it a little bit with the eval. It's like minus 0.9 for black. So here we play rook to d7, getting our rook to safety. And white plays pawn to h3. Small inaccuracy. Here's the reason why. This bishop on b4 wants to get active. It really wants to try to pressure the white king. How does this bishop pressure the white king? It has to use the dark squares. But these two pawns are pretty solid. So playing h3 softens up this g3 pawn just a little bit. And this is another important endgame technique. This has happened in a lot of my games against players, usually in the 2000s. Every time you push a pawn forward, it does create a potential weakness from the squares that it just left. So this pawn leaving h2 leaves g3 a bit tender. Our bishop can take advantage of that down the road. It's a very small move, small inaccuracy, but those types of moves you have to be very careful about playing. Pawn to h3. Queen to e5. The idea is let's bring the bishop here and go right after g3. Knight f3. Now queen to e4. Another tool that you can use to press your opponents are pins, right? It sounds simple, but the queen pins the knight on f3. So it's just an extra thing that white has to think about. This queen is defending c2 and e3. So the black queen is the MVP right now. She's pinning the f3 knight. She's making the white queen hold the pawn on e3. She's making the white queen hold the rook on c2. So white's playing very defensive here. We're playing active. And that's one of the key points in today's lesson too. Play active in the endgames, right? We need to convert this win. We got to create difficult questions for white. because even though it's a minus 0.9, with best play, this is going to be a draw. Create difficult questions for your opponent and play actively. Rook to c4 by white. And he's trying to play actively, pushing me back. Queen to b7. But now, there's a really cool threat here. Look at how the queen pins this knight. Rook to d2 is a threat, lining up queen and king. Huge threat. So white plays rook to d4. Now rook to e7. And the idea here is, let's pin this e3 pawn. We already have this knight pinned. Now what we got to do is figure out how to get this bishop into the attack. Well, there's a big threat here. Bishop to c5, creating another attacker on this pawn on e3. Rook to c4 played. Bishop d6. And now the idea is we're going to put the bishop back on b8. So the bishop on b8 points at this pawn on e3, which was weakened when this h-pawn pushed. So we're trying to take advantage of that one little inaccuracy earlier. In these last 6 or 7 moves, the eval has been about the same this whole time, right? So what we're trying to do is go from that -1 eval to, can we get the win? Pawn to e4 played, top engine move. This is a strong move. Putting the pawn on a light square, playing actively. Now bishop to a7. The idea here is, let's eye this diagonal. Maybe we put the queen on b6 and hit f2. Pawn to g4. Now I think this is a good move in terms of playing for counterplay. White is trying to play actively himself. What he wants to do, I was thinking during the game, is play pawn to g5. And if he's able to get this f-pawn to move, then this king is in more danger, right? Because maybe the white queen can get on this diagonal with some sort of rook to c8, and there could be checkmating threats for white. So I have to watch for pawn g5. So here we play pawn to h6. Controlling that g-pawn. Don't let it get to g5. Queen c2 played, and now queen to b6. The idea here is actually queen to e3. So it's not a check, right? It's tempting to look at queen to g1 check, queen to f2 check. They're both covered. Queen to e3 is the threat. Just sneaking our queen in there and trying to cause some problems. And then we could potentially use our king side pawns to get at the white king. Rook to c6 played. Now queen to e3. And rook takes e4 is coming next. This is a double attack on the e-pawn. The best move here is rook to c4. And then black can play bishop to b8, getting on this other diagonal with queen f4 coming. So the eval has gone from -1 to -2. We're making progress. Rook to c3 was played. Now we grab the pawn, and we transition into a queenless endgame. The bishop is going to be stronger than the knight here, because the bishop can easily get to both sides of the board. Like, picture the bishop in the middle. See how it can guard h8, a7, a1, g1. That bishop can very easily go on both flanks. The knight is a bit clumsier. The knight is slower, right? It has to make hops to get from one side to the other. So the bishop is stronger. White does have 2 pawns on the queen side to r1 though. So white's got that potential passer, and we have the double f pawns. Here white plays rook to c2. Now, chat time. What's the best move for black here? And I botched it during the game, so let's see if you guys can find a good move for black. How do we play for the win? Pawn to a4, chess simple. Pawn to f5, Insidia. Pawn to a4, Jagajit. Pawn to f5, rook. Pawn to a4. Yeah, pawn to a4 is a good move. Still -2. It wasn't one of the top 3, but it's very close. Pawn to f5, also good, around -2. Great answers. And I was thinking after the game, doing some analysis with the computer. An easy way to explain how black can win this, I think, is pawn to g5. It looks a little bit funky, allowing this white pawn to control these squares, but here's the reason. Our king marches up, and we'll get this scenario where we can trade pawn for pawn, and the bishop and rook are sort of dominating the white king. And we were ready to play f5 if white didn't play this way. So you guys are right. a4 is good. We can trade a set of pawns over here. Start to advance with the kingside pawns. That's how you play for the win. And the one pawn remaining on the a file will not be enough for white. I played rook f4. It's a little bit of a mistake. There's a super strong move for white. Rook to c4. And after rook takes, pawn takes. Some winning chances for black, but with best play, this leads to a draw. Okay, so I play f5, and the idea is I just wanted to trade off the double pawn and take back with the rook. So my opponent takes, rook takes. Now white plays rook to e5. Last quiz of the game, what do you play here? There's one move that stands out above the rest. How do you get the win here? Type your answer in the chat. All right, king f6, king f6, king f6, king f6. Trade rooks. Yep, so rook takes e5, probably still winning. I think very good chance. But I think an improvement is to play king f6 first, so you guys nailed it. Because now, after rook takes f5, which is played in the game, king takes f5. My opponent played knight to d4 check. He just kind of, in time pressure, missed my bishop on a7. But let's show what happens if knight d2. We could play bishop d4, bishop c3, and the problem for white is this construction of bishop and pawn holds these two pawns. The only way white can break through with a3, b4 is if this knight is somehow able to guard the b4 square. Well, where can it do that from? Here, you can't get there. Or here, only through knight b6. So let's say white tries that plan. a3, knight here, coming this way. Black breaks through on the king side, two passed pawns connected. And now can play the king up, guarding this important square. So there's no knight to d5 to prep b4. And this is going to be a pretty straightforward win. These pawns push, the king steps up, the bishop can check it away, and the pawns are just going to keep pushing, and eventually the king won't care about this square because black's going to get a queen. So this, I think, was a nice example of playing actively to convert a better endgame that wasn't quite winning. We just had to keep poking and prodding at white, trying to create weaknesses. And you always want to think in terms of simplifications, right? If we trade the queens off in this scenario, do we feel we're winning the endgame? Because if we don't, then let's not play queen takes e4 here. And the rook trade scenario, do we feel the chances are better after the rook trade? Yeah, it felt like it was winning, so we go for that. So play actively. Keep thinking in terms of simplifications. That was one of our points very early on when we had the slides about the endgames. Think in terms of, if I simplify into endgame A, is that going to be a win? If I simplify to endgame B, is that a win? Or is it a draw? You want to figure out which endgames you're aiming to simplify to, right? It's like this big decision tree, and you're trying to find a path that gets you the desired result, whether it's a win or a draw. Tim is saying king f6. That's correct, Tim. Okay, so now we're an hour and 16 minutes in. I have a special course promotion that we've done during other live streams as well. Do you guys want to jump to the course promotion now? Or do you want to look at one more endgame? Let me know in the chat. Endgame or promotion? And if you say endgame, we'll do the promotion after. And I think I know the answer. Dennis is saying promotion. Everyone else is saying one more, endgame. All right, one more. Encore. Endgame and promotion. Okay. All right, so we're playing white here. Our opponent's over 2,000 from my local club. He also performed at the master level in his last event. Each side is down to 5 minutes. 30-second delay. What move do you play here? Put it in the chat. If you want to think about this position for a minute, go ahead, because we haven't really talked about the imbalances yet. We are up one pawn, kind of up this B pawn, I guess, if you cancel out E and G. So up one pawn, 2 minors each and 2 rooks. Technically middle game, right, because we had 8 pieces, but it sort of feels like an end game already. No queens. What move do you play here as white? Okay, Insidia, I see your knight f5. Go a little bit deeper. So if you play knight f5, okay, there's a lot of knight f5s. So let's talk about this. If you play knight f5, give me a response after king to f6 as well. So knight f5, king f6, what do you play after that? And keep in mind the rook on g1's attacked with check. So let's go a little bit deeper here. Knight f5, king f6. So Chess Simple is saying rook g to f1 in the current position. Yeah, so if your answer is knight f5, type out the additional moves. Rook takes g6 check. Oh, so Presta J is saying take, here, check, king takes, fork. But what about take, here, take, rook takes? Barrett is saying knight to a3. Barrett, I'm not sure what you mean. Knight a3 is here, but maybe you're saying knight back to e3? Or to g3? Okay, so knight f5 is the correct move. Knight f5 is the strongest move. King f6 played in the game. Now, what do we play here? So I'm moving you guys forward one move. What do you play here? Put your answer in the chat. There's only one winning move. Everything else is equal. Jagajit is saying knight takes d6 here. We'll wait for a few other responses to roll in. What do we play here? Bishop takes bishop. e7. Rook g3. Okay, I see a knight takes d6. Rook g3. Rook g3. Rook takes b3 check. That'd be g6. Rook takes g6 check. Let's look at rook g3. I think rook g3 is a natural looking move. Here there's knight takes f4. And when this king moves, best move is here, king takes f5. So now we're down a piece. And with best play, this is going to be a draw. So this one's a draw with best play. I mean, we could still maybe get the win, but the best move is knight takes d6. Exchange, sacrifice. And this is a little bit taking a step back from endgames for a second. One thing that I recommend that all of you guys do is create takeaways from all of your games. Try to learn something from every single game and implement those in future games. Something from my own play that I've noticed is I tend to undervalue the exchange sacrifice. I overvalue material. I overvalue the rook versus knight, which maybe goes back to that other endgame where everyone wanted the knight and 2 pawns versus a rook. But I know now that I overvalue the material when it comes to exchange sacks. I was actively thinking about that during this game. This opportunity to grab 2 pawns and sacrifice the exchange was going through my mind because I know that I miss exchange sacks too often. So I was able to find this winning plan. So that's outside of the endgame lesson, but that shows the importance of creating these takeaways, right? So your takeaway could be play more endgames. Your takeaway could be really be careful with exchange sacks, right? Give extra respect to having the knight and a pawn versus a rook, for example. Now after knight takes g1, we take back. And these passed pawns are connected passers, like rook is saying, super strong. And the rooks are playing passive right now. Bishop takes b5, knight takes rook a2. And this position also goes back to the playing active point. Always look to play active in the endgames. Rook takes b1, b2 is a threat. You do not want to play rook to b1 here. This is such a bad square for the rook. And the b pawn doesn't help at all at the moment. So there's much better moves than rook to b1. And one of them is rook to h1. That's what was played in the game. And the idea is this rook is going to swing to h7. Rook to e1 is also a very good move here. And after the check, you can move the king to f3, and then the rook is behind the pawn. Rook h1 played. Rook takes b2. The king goes up. My opponent plays rook to d8. So he's trying to play active. He wants to sack his rook. We take d5, and it might be drawing territory. That looks very close to a draw. Here, we play rook to h7. And this goes back to another one of those endgame principles when we talked about having the king on the 8th rank for our opponent and also mating nets. Look at this. It's a mating net. Rook to f7 is checkmate, guarded by a pawn, and this pawn guards these 2 squares. And my opponent played rook takes b5. Clocks were low, like all of these endgames, and I was able to get the checkmate. But this eval is around +7 at depth 21, so it's already a win for white. It's just kind of a matter of time to get the conversion. But rook to f7 is a huge threat here. Black lost the game.